speed. America's always had a love affair with speed. It all started here, the Daytona Beach, Florida area. The birth and rise of NASCAR into a motorsport phenomenon was a uniquely American, if improbable, rags to riches story. Carved from the white sands of Daytona and the humble red dirt clay of the southern Piedmont by one very determined man, commanding a roving band of rebels and outlaws. The dawn of the automobile age struck like thunder at the turn of the 20th century, igniting an insatiable fascination for speed throughout the United States. By 1903, adventurous and wealthy sportsmen who could afford to build the latest high-speed contraptions wintered each February in Daytona, where they tested both their courage and skill at nearby Ormond Beach in good-natured but daring duels. The American Automobile Association, or AAA, a new motoring club, soon began to certify the results of the annual speed trials. But while the upper class raced their one-of-a-kind open-wheel creations, the American working class was creating a racing league of its own. Shortly after the first mass-produced, or stock Model T, was introduced in 1908, Midwesterners stripped off the fenders of Henry Ford's invention and went racing on small farms and fairground horse tracks.
It became, well, who's got the fastest car? Well, they had to settle that, so they built them a racetrack out in the dirt, and who had the fastest car, who was the better driver. And pretty soon somebody came up with the idea, well, let's sell tickets, because maybe somebody wants to see this, because I would imagine it's pretty doggone exciting.
With the roaring 1920s, stock car racing continued to grow in popularity among the American hard-working people, spreading beyond the Midwest to every region in the United States. But the glamorous motorsport establishment, led by AAA, snubbed the simple stock cars in favor of the more sophisticated open-wheel race cars.
It's the exclusive Firestone gum dipping process.
The AAA Contest Board had begun endorsing what would become the most famous open-wheel race in the world, a 500-mile event at the Indianapolis Speedway. The winter event at Ormond Beach was now a highly publicized attraction, establishing the official world land speed record. But the affair was no longer the domain of a privileged few.
Sir Henry Seagrave, a fellow Englishman, had skill and iron nerves. Most important, he had the 1,000-horsepower Sunbeam.
A rapidly increasing number of curious stock car racing fans were traveling to Florida each year to watch the spectacle, which reached its zenith in the 1930s with thrilling competition between gentleman racers Sir Henry Seagrave and Sir Malcolm Campbell. In 1935, Campbell blistered the beach at over 276 miles per hour, but the record-setting runs would not last. The unstable sands of the beach made the competition too dangerous, and the event was moved to the barren salt flats of Utah. The financial loss was a huge blow to the city of Daytona Beach, which was heavily reliant upon the festival for its tourism dollars. To offset the loss of the speed tournament, Daytona Beach officials in 1936 hastily constructed a 3.2-mile beach road course. The unique yet untested track, shaped like a paperclip, connected Daytona's city streets to the beach of the Atlantic Ocean. Thousands of spectators turned out to watch the first two races in 1936 and 37, the first organized stock car events in history. In both races, nearly half of the competitors did not finish, because the deep sand in the turns swallowed their heavy stock cars. Despite the turnout, the city lost thousands of dollars. For the 1938 race, desperate city officials asked driver and mechanic Bill France to organize the event. France had shown his savvy by driving his lightweight Ford coupe to a top finish in the first race in '36.
He could see right off the bat, and he was in some of those events, that some more organization needed to be put together.
The tall, lanky France, who had recently moved his young family to Daytona Beach from Washington, D.C., learned his skills while racing the family car on steeply banked board tracks in nearby Maryland. France jumped at the challenge and set himself on a course that would forever change his life.
In the sixth time around, the field has already diminished considerably due to engine failure.
Embarrassed by the earlier failures, AAA flatly refused to endorse France's race, permanently dismissing the common stocks as nothing more than a third-rate joyride for the working class.
Over 50 qualifying cars are lined up in handicap position, awaiting the starting signal that'll send them hurtling over the wind-swept Florida beaches.
The young promoter plunged ahead anyway, determined to make his event a winner. For better traction, he put a special clay in the corners and shortened the race. France displayed a sharp talent for publicity, attracting thousands of spectators. The motley collection of competitors, many of whom were thrill-seeking moonshiners, excited the crowd with their show-stopping antics in a race that came off without a glitch. Miraculously, the first-time promoter turned a profit. With success under his belt, France vowed to prove that AAA was mistaken in their opinion of stock car racing.
Automobile racing has always been popular in the South, long before NASCAR was formed, long before Bill France ever started driving. When the moonshiners started to argue about whose car was better, and they took them out to a racetrack to see if mine was better than yours, these were our guys that are out there racing. And that's what captured the fancy of the people, as opposed to having a bunch of visitors from other sections of the country with highly specialized cars coming.
During the early 1920s, profits from Prohibition flowed like water from a clear mountain stream to bootleggers in the Carolinas, Georgia, and the Virginias, Southern whiskey trippers who had plenty of practice driving on switchback mountain roads, outfitted their Ford coupes with specialized parts and went racing. Shade Tree Mechanics soon joined the outlaw bootleggers when the inexpensive yet powerful Ford flathead engine became more widely available in the 1930s. Anyone with modest mechanical skills could rescue a flathead from the junk heap and rebuild it for racing. Speed spread like gossip through the small, rural hamlets of the southern Piedmont.
W.J. Cash, he was a famous journalist who wrote a book called The Mind of the South, tracing it really back into the 19th century and how in the South there developed this culture built around what he called the hell of a fella, who was the kind of guy who would spontaneously break into foot races, yell out loud, drink as much whiskey as he could possibly hold, doing all sorts of wild stuff. And this became really a mark of manhood for many young men in the South to act like this. When the automobile comes along, it offers them an outlet to express that. So people go into street racing, and then once the tracks grow up, into racing itself. The Piedmont region is the fertile crescent, I guess you would say, of stock car racing, partly because of these cultural values that were so important.
Nowhere was this cultural phenomenon more evident than just outside Atlanta, Georgia. Bootleggers rushed from the North Georgia hills to run at the first organized track in the southern part of the United States, Lakewood Speedway, rightly earning its nickname, the Indianapolis of the South.
We had some showmen back in those days. I mean, sure enough, showmen. At Lakewood, when they come down that chute running over 100 miles an hour, they'd cross a car right in front of the grandstand and stand on it for all it's worth. It was a sight to behold.
Lakewood Speedway, in combination with the prosperous Georgia moonshine business, produced a steady stream of young daredevils, establishing the building block of early stock car racing. The track's influence was so widespread that local garages, ready and willing to supply daring drivers with the tools of their trade, sprung up on nearly every corner in downtown Atlanta.
Anybody driving could always get a car to drive. If he didn't own his own, somebody would be thrilled to death to get one, because usually it kills somebody about once a week, and they didn't have any safety measures in.
It was so dusty, in fact, I'd look at the trees and count 1, 2, 3 and keep looking to the left for the guardrail to know where I was on the track. You couldn't see where you were going.
Along with Langhorne Speedway outside Philadelphia, the 1-mile Georgia dirt track hosted the most significant early stock car races on the East Coast. Lakewood's 18,000-seat grandstand generated handsome prize money, attracting the two most outrageous bootleggers of the day, cousins Rebel Roy Hall and Lloyd C.
Those guys got sharpened their talents by running on the back roads of Georgia and usually outrunning their revenues or whoever was pursuing them. And that was a race you had to win.
In 1938, Lakewood promoted an event they hailed as the National Championship Stock Car Race. The 18-year-old prodigy, C, won the race in a 1934 Ford supplied by another cousin, the dapper and dashing Raymond Parks, owner of the Hemp Hill service station in downtown Atlanta. Hall, who is alleged to have piloted the getaway cars in several bank robberies, just might have been the most talented of the Georgia drivers. But the hell-raising bootlegger lost too much track time, evading the revenuers who were always hot on his tail. He never minded an overnight in jail, for it was a free bed and a free meal. Parks supplied his cousins with 2 brand-new Ford Coupes to drive at Bill France's 1939 Daytona Beach race, making Parks the first multi-car owner in stock car racing history.
But if you got to drive one of his cars, you were in hog heaven, really.
Raymond Parks, a very quiet individual, always well-mannered, well-dressed, and a lot of people wanted to copy after him. And if you could outrun some of the drivers that raced with for Raymond Parks, you had really done something without any doubt about it. In my opinion, the talk was right here in Atlanta when it first started about NASCAR.
Twisting the wrenches for Parks was the brilliant Louis Red Vogt, the finest stock car mechanic of his era. Vogt's garage in downtown Atlanta supplied customers on both sides of the law, but he preferred supplying the whiskey runners because they paid in cash on the spot, while the checks to the revenuers were slow to arrive from Washington, D.C.
There were some revenuers that were just as famous for their driving as some of the moonshiners were. He would build these guys these moonshine cars for a certain route from Dawsonville to Atlanta. He built a special car for these people.
By 1940, France and the spectacular Georgians were stars on the Southern racing circuit, a disorganized and corrupt collection of races run on old dirt horse tracks, better suited for beasts than men. On the strength of 2 wins, France was declared the national stock car champion in 1940, though there was no formal point system to verify the title. He also continued to promote races on the beach. Big Bill's reputation for honesty spread among the drivers, who rewarded him by showing up on time at his Daytona races, entertaining the crowd with legendary style. In 1941, Lloyd C. flipped his car twice at the beach and still managed to finish 4th, taking the checkered flag riding on just 2 wheels. 3 years later, the young driver was shot dead by his cousin Woodrow Anderson in an argument over moonshine. Just as Bill France's outfit was hitting its stride, the United States entered World War II, ending auto racing of any kind in America. All of America's resources, both human and material, were put towards the war. France joined the cause as an engine foreman in a Daytona shipyard. The racing engines were silent in America from 1942 to 1945. But that instantly changed the day America triumphed in World War II. Americans, proud but weary, were ready to move on with their lives. They filled the grandstands of many spectator sports, but especially auto racing, now called America's sport, because of its dangerous nature and spirit of adventure. In the first race in 1945, Rebel Roy Hall edged past Bill France to win a 75-mile thriller at Lakewood. The Parks boat team won 4 straight races on the beach from 1946 to 49. Atlanta native Eddie Samples was recognized as the national champion in 1946. Another Georgian, Gober Sosby, won 3 straight modified races on the beach. Raymond Parks added Red Byron and the fabulous Flying Flock brothers, Bob and Fontarello, to his stable of drivers. The talented brothers were the oldest members of the first family effort in stock car racing, the Daredevil Flocks.
How long have you been in the racing business, Fonty? Since 1938.
Bob and the flashy Fonty got their start in bootlegging at the urging of their mother, the widowed Big Mama Flock, who had struggled to feed her family working at a hosiery mill.
What's your mother think about all this?
Well, my mother's got gray hair.
Well, I don't wonder. Well, I certainly would like to.
My mother's interested and she's here.
Oh, she's here, Mom. Oh, come in here, Mother.
That's right.
What do you think about all
this?
Oh,
I think they're wonderful, huh?
Do you?
Yeah, I just keep my fingers crossed.
The brothers ran whiskey for their uncle Peachtree Williams, who was one of Atlanta's most prosperous moonshiners. The Atlanta Police Department could never capture bail jumper Bob, so city officials passed an ordinance stating that no one could compete at Lakewood if they had a case pending in the Atlanta courts. Racing under an alias, Bob snuck into one race. The police had arranged a dragnet to capture the wily driver after the race, but Bob, as usual, was one step ahead of the law.
When you go down the front straightaway at Lakewood, there's a little short driveway type thing that goes right out to the road, and he just went right out that way and hit the road and took off, and the police took off after him. They never did catch him.
Adventure was not limited to the Flock brothers. Sisters Rio and Ethel were just as high-flying as their brothers. Rio was an accomplished motorcycle racer who often wore a 6-shooter pistol at her side. She was one of America's first female biplane wing walkers. Sister Ethel Flock later joined the stock car racing circuit, becoming one of the very first female racers in Bill France's venture. But it was the youngest Flock, Tim, who would later establish some of the most enduring achievements in NASCAR history. In 1946, France quit driving to devote full attention to promoting, as he now had stiff competition from other racing organizations. He expanded his racing operation to small tracks throughout the South, and he even dreamed of the day he would take his show nationwide. In a chance meeting with the cantankerous Charlotte newspaperman Wilton Garrison, France was offered some advice that would help him distance his operation from rivals and mark a crucial turning point in stock car racing history. France went to Garrison seeking press coverage for an upcoming race. The young promoter claimed his race would decide the national champion that year. Garrison point-blank asked him how he could make such a statement.
And they finally asked him, to answer your question, what do you think we need to do? And he says, well, you need to have records. You need to keep track of who did what, the score, like baseball does. So a point system was added to establish the championship for the following year. And we've had a championship ever since.
Garrison also suggested France create a series of races where the rules were consistently the same and regularly enforced. He also recommended France turn to his old nemesis, AAA, for organizational support.
He went to the 3A which was the paramount sanction organization at that time. They came off of the Indianapolis 500, was their biggest event. And they told him they weren't interested in it. The term was, we're only interested in the big stuff.
This fresh insult by the sanctioning body, similar to the one France endured in 1938, both haunted and motivated Big Bill France throughout his early years as a promoter. AAA had a stranglehold on many of the sport's most profitable venues, so the rejection meant France would have to, for the most part, limit his promotion to tracks throughout the South. In 1947, France rebounded with willful confidence, announcing he would direct a series of races, not just one race at a time. France's promotional slogan for the new series was, "Where the fastest that run the fastest." France welcomed back to his new series the returning war veterans, many of whom brought home crucial knowledge in mechanics, aerodynamics, and battlefield experience that they would apply to racing. Furthermore, the brave, adrenaline-fueled, hell of a fella nature of the Southern drivers and mechanics and owners had made them very courageous soldiers.
They know that to get where you have to go, you have to give more than 100%. You can't just sit there and let things happen. You have to make something happen. And that's what these guys from the South did. When they went to Europe, they wanted to come home. They knew they had to get through with things before they could come home. You weren't going to come home till the war was over, or you were in a body bag.
Growing up on his family's Spartanburg, South Carolina farm in the 1930s, Walter Bud Moore sharpened his natural gift for mechanics by repairing old farm machinery. On carefree Sunday afternoons, Moore and his 6 brothers stiffened the suspensions and doctored the engines of old Model T Fords and went racing.
We got to where we'd taken the bodies off of them, making what we call a strip down. We really made us a little race car out of them, especially out of the T models and some of the A models we had. And we probably had 15 or 20 of them there, and running those things all over the farm, racing with them. That's how I really got interested in this stuff.
As a teenager, Moore had journeyed down to Daytona Beach whenever he could to catch a glimpse of the exciting beach races, dreaming that he might one day field a car there himself. But war interrupted his plans. By the spring of 1944, the 20-year-old Moore was a member of the 90th Infantry Division. And on June 6th, D-Day, his company, a heavy weapons unit, took part in the historic invasion of the Allied forces against the Germans at Normandy, France. As artillery shells and machine gun fire rained down upon him, Moore and his company stormed Utah Beach, one of the most strategic and dangerous landing zones in the invasion.
We were trained, the first thing to do and the best thing to do is get off of that beach as fast as you could. I had a 51-pound machine gun tripod on my shoulders and my backpack and all I did is didn't pay no attention to anything or anybody, just went straight in. I was completely out of breath and scared to death, I don't mind telling you.
Moore was injured 5 times throughout the course of the war in Europe, returning each time after his recovery. Now attached to Patton's Third Army, Moore and his Jeep driver came upon an enemy unit that had made a small farmhouse their headquarters.
So I blasted a couple more times in the winter to let them know we meant business. And they stuck out a white flag and they come walking out there and I couldn't believe it. We had 27 enlisted men and 5 German officers.
Moore remained on the front lines until the end of the European War, 8 months and 14 days. For his faithful service and heroism, he was awarded 2 Bronze Stars and 5 Purple Hearts. Moore returned home to South Carolina and opened up a used car business, but on nights and weekends, he built lightning-fast Ford coupes. Car owner Raymond Parks served throughout the entire war as a machine gunner in the 99th Infantry of the First Army in Europe, at one point living in foxholes for 109 days. At Elsbourne Ridge on the northern edge of the Ardennes forest, Parks fought in the decisive Battle of the Bulge during one of the harshest winters of the century. Raymond Parks and Bud Moore were just two of the many racing pioneers who served America in World War II. After their intense battle experiences, these men could not imagine returning to a life working in just a mill or a factory.
They got to the racetrack and they heard the noise, they saw the excitement, and they saw the rush. The cars rushing around the racetrack, and they strapped in and went on it.
At Daytona, Parks' driver, Red Byron, captured the first race of France's new series. The intelligent and modest Byron was refined compared to most of the drivers on the stock car circuit. While serving as a flight engineer in a B-24 bomber during the war, he was shot down over the Aleutian Islands in the Pacific. Critically wounded, Byron spent 27 months in Army hospitals, fighting off doctors who wanted to amputate both legs. Byron's return to racing was a miracle.
He, of all people, really exemplifies that individual who came out of the service, who just couldn't give up that adrenaline rush that they had experienced during the war. His left leg was permanently damaged, and they had to make a special stirrup so he could operate the clutch. And to go out and to be as successful as he was is a pretty incredible story.
Other competitors in that first season included 18-year-old rookie Glenn Fireball Roberts and 33-year-old newcomer Lee Petty. Crowd pleaser Fonty Flock, driving a Parks Vote Beauty, captured the first series title in 1947. France kept his promise and awarded Flock a big, beautiful trophy and a $1,000 check. Flock also appeared on the cover of the first issue of the magazine Speed Age.
Because my husband's in the Navy, and I want to do a job that means more than working in a department store.
Big Bill was always on the lookout for new talent, and he found it in the Rosie the Riveter generation of World War II women. France would add a lady to his racing ticket for his next race at the new Greenville-Pickens, South Carolina track. He asked around town for the best lady driver. He didn't have to look too far to find Louise Smith, a 30-year-old South Carolina cotton mill worker who stood no taller than 5 feet, but she had what counted most in stock car racing, a brave heart and a lead foot.
Oh, yeah, I'd outrun every cop in here around this part of the country.
She was a real hot rod around town, and she liked to literally race the policeman back to where she lived. She got quite a reputation in the Greenville, South Carolina area.
France paid Smith $100 per race in appearance money. In a press release, he touted her as the first lady of stock car racing. But her male counterparts were not too happy with her presence on the track.
If they didn't want a woman out there, they figured a woman would get in the way.
Smith, who had no formal racing experience, competed in her first event driving a hot rod coupe supplied by Big Bill France. Believing she wouldn't last long in the race, officials didn't even bother to instruct her on the rules.
So the race was over with, but all of a sudden there they look out and Louise is still going around the racetrack. So they said, well, maybe she missed the checkered flag. The flagman waves at her again, and she just keeps on going. Finally, the guy says, well, throw the red flag. Maybe, I don't know if I remember telling her about the checkered flag. So now the guy did tell her that when a red flag ever flew, that means stop. So they actually had to throw the red flag after the race was over with to get her to stop the race car.
They didn't say a thing about checker flag, and I had sense enough to know that a green flag meant go, but that's all I did know.
Fellow racer Buddy Schumann got tired of seeing Smith bounced around on the track, so he offered her some helpful advice.
He showed me just a spot on the back bumper you could touch them, and you could cut them a flip. So I did that. I knocked a few of them out of the way. It was kind of funny, and it made the news that day, and we didn't have much news, no way. I was fired up. I really was.
Smith became the first regular female competitor on France's circuit. And for her feisty personality, the men nicknamed her the Agitator. In 1949, she snuck down to Daytona, telling her husband she was going on a vacation. Instead, she took the family car and entered it into the beach race. She flipped over in the treacherous north turn, but with the help of spectators, she turned the car back up and continued on, finishing 20th. Smith salvaged what was left of the car and started the long drive back to Greenville, wondering how she would ever explain the mangled car to her husband. But she never made it. She broke down in Augusta, Georgia, abandoning the heap at a body shop.
I left it down there at Jack Dempsey's place to be fixed, and he'll fix it and my husband won't know the difference. And I caught the bus to home, and I thought I was getting away with something, and I come in the office. He said, "Where's the car?" I said, "That old thing ain't no good." I said, "It broke down on me on the other side of Augusta, and I had to catch a bus to Greenville." He said, "You did?" I said, "Yeah." He spread it out in newspaper. The whole section was in big pictures, Louis Smith wrecks at Daytona. And I looked at him, and I didn't know what to think. And I just turned around and walked out the door. I was scared for him to come home that night. I didn't know what he was going to do. He kind of got over it, and he said, "If Bill France calls again," said, "take your clothes." I said, "That ain't hard to do. I ain't got but 2 more blouses." And I put them in the back of the race car.
Despite her husband's warning, Smith continued racing. She was a member of a small sorority of women who competed alongside the men in stock car racing events from 1946 to 1956. Sarah Christian was the most naturally talented of the lady drivers. France hailed the Atlanta housewife as the leading woman stock car driver in the country. Ethel Flock also competed head-to-head with the rough-and-tumble men.
She ran, I think, about 8 different races with the boys on the track. And she loved to compete with her brothers, and not only compete with them, but loved to beat them.
With the Garrison reprimand in the back of his mind, France gathered a hand-picked collection of drivers, owners, and mechanics, 35 people in all, to the Streamline Hotel in Daytona Beach in December of 1947 to discuss the future of stock car racing. The purpose of the meeting was to adopt a standard of rules and form a governing body to oversee the future of the series. Top mechanic Red Vogt from Atlanta came up with the name of the new organization, NASCAR, the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. NASCAR was formally incorporated in February 1948, and France was voted president and awarded the majority of the stock. New cars were still in short supply, so drivers in France's series continued to compete in pre-war modified coupes. These hot rods were preferred by purists, like the young hotshot Fireball Roberts, because they could be easily altered with specialized parts to reach higher speeds. The first NASCAR sanctioned race took place at Daytona in February 1948. A crowd of 14,000 paid $2.50 each to watch disabled World War II hero Red Byron continue his riveting comeback by winning the action-packed event. Byron went on to capture the overall series championship, winning 11 times. A punishing schedule of 52 events were held in the first NASCAR 48 season, despite a 2-week interruption due to a polio outbreak. Sadly, Slick Davis became the first NASCAR driver to die in action when he was killed while racing in Greensboro, North Carolina. By now, France was competing against no less than 6 other racing organizations. His most menacing rival was promoter Bruton Smith, whose operation began challenging France for supremacy. France took a giant leap of faith and promoted an event featuring only late model, strictly stock automobiles. Big Bill's instinct told him fans would be more interested in races featuring cars that they could actually drive themselves. Only full-size family cars could qualify, and they could not be altered in any way from the factory version, except to reinforce the wheels for safety. On June 19, 1949, 13,000 fans, twice the number the grandstands could hold, showed up for the historic event at the Charlotte Speedway. 33 competitors in all, driving 9 popular makes of cars, started the race.
It was the fiasco, a major one. They didn't have enough police, didn't expect as big a crowd. The track got so rough that they had to stop it a couple of times because you were afraid of killing somebody.
Most of those cars that was in that first race probably were rentals. They'd probably about 20 of them were rentals.
The Flock brothers were the main attraction as they held the first 3 starting positions. On race day, Tim Flock, who by now was a 2-year veteran of France's circuit, convinced a spectator who was just minding his business in the infield to let him borrow and race the man's brand new Oldsmobile 88 family car. Sarah Christian qualified 13th, driving a Ford owned by her husband, Frank, and Lee Petty also borrowed a 47 Buick from a gas station owner.
They drove it to Charlotte, pulled it in a Texaco station, put it up on the rack, raised it up, greased the thing, changed the oil, filled it up with gas, put a number on it with tape, and drove it down to the racetrack.
The atmosphere was electric as cars of every size, shape, and color kicked up a dust bowl around the tattered 3/4-mile track for the 150-mile race. Glenn Dunaway, who was driving a Ford owned by a well-known bootlegger, crossed the finish line 3 laps ahead of Jim Roper. In the very first NASCAR post-race inspection, officials discovered illegal wedge springs on the winning car. The springs, a common bootleg trick, were of course not in the Ford parts catalog. Dunaway was disqualified.
Dunaway's car owner sued NASCAR and sought to have the win handed back to him. And the courts upheld NASCAR's point of view, which was a very pivotal moment in racing because it gave NASCAR and its founder, Big Bill France, the authority to both set and enforce regulations.
Jim Roper was declared the winner of the race, and Lee Petty was the only driver to crash.
They'd run about half the race and broke something on the car and blew a tire, turned the thing over, tore all the doors off of it. Then my brother and myself and mother and Daddy then thumbed a ride with his brother back home.
France held 7 more strictly stock races in 1949, the only promoter to offer such racing. For the 2nd year in a row, Red Byron captured the overall championship. Remarkably, Sarah Christian finished the year 13th in points, well ahead of her husband Frank, who finished tied for 26th. Christian made 6 starts in the inaugural strictly stock season, recording a 5th place at Pittsburgh Heidelberg Speedway, still, to this day, the best finish ever by a woman in NASCAR. The growing France racing operation was a close-knit family affair.
All of us did different jobs. We parked cars, we sold tickets, we put guardrail in, swept the track, we put calcium chloride on the dirt tracks to keep the dust down, watered the tracks, you name it. Mother sold tickets and kept the books and tried to make sure there was more money in the bank than what we were spending. When he would do something a little bit wild and take a chance and it was a loser, she'd always be able to wake up the next day and do business.
This was a smart man, and his wife Annie, they were 2 smart people, because here he was making all these deals and she's in the back door trying to hold off the creditors.
And he was bullheaded to a degree. He didn't want to take no for an answer. If he hit one dead-end road, he'd try and find another road.
Big Bill was a charismatic and intimidating figure with considerable skills of persuasion. France used an iron hand to control the pit area.
Well, he was extremely strong-willed. He believed in doing things his way. There was a lot of differences of opinion. Most of the time, he would win the war.
He listened a lot, and then when he said something, he always said something that was worthwhile listening to.
Well, Bill France would help anybody. He knew that you needed help, and he would come up to you and just say, you know, he used to call everybody son. He says, "Can I help you? What do you need?"
He got a lot of drivers started in racing, and he used to loan them money, and, you know, it might have been an ulterior motive. He had them in his hand if he did that.
He used one against the other. The old game of just using, playing one end against the other, and that's how you got it rolling.
He was 6'4" and pretty solid individual, and he had a lot of confidence. He knew what he was doing.
For the 1950 season, France renamed his strictly stock division the Grand National, which he borrowed from the famed English horse race, a showcase event he associated with superior quality. NASCAR was sweeping throughout the South, stirring up zealous loyalty and devotion among its growing fan base. Every town wanted its own NASCAR race.
If a man had a bulldozer and he had a cow pasture, he'd go out there and cut him a groove.
From just about Richmond to Birmingham in that Piedmont arc where red clay predominates, that almost in every county by the late 40s or early 50s, practically every one of them has a dirt track. You got these people who are able to, go in and for, relatively little money, carve out a dirt track, throw up a board fence, they put up an outhouse, maybe, and a concession stand, a ticket booth. You've got a racetrack. These people are racing these old late 30s Fords There are tons of them in junkyards. For less than $100, they can buy an old heap, get together with their friends, fix it up. If they got a little extra money, they can buy some performance parts. They can go out and try their luck. Upper-class Southerners sneered at what was going on down at the dirt track. It wasn't the place that you wanted your daughter to go. This is very much a working-class phenomenon.
Watching a NASCAR race from the grandstands could be an uncomfortable experience for both driver and spectators alike, as Frank Mundy discovered after cruising to victory one Sunday.
After the race, I was in Victory Lane. I turned around and saw this nice-looking lady standing next to me. Her eyes were clear, but the rest of her face and the rest of her body was just full of red clay. And sitting in the grandstand that day, the wind was blowing and it went right into the stand. So I said to her nonchalantly and kidding, of course, "What number were you driving?" And she pulled back her pocketbook because she was peeled, and I got out of the way so she couldn't hit me with it.
The rural track sped young drivers into NASCAR, much like minor league farm teams cultivate up-and-coming young talent for Major League Baseball.
When I was just small, 10 and 12 years old, I'd go over here to the fairground and watch Cotton Owens and them run. This guy by the name of Graham Padgett had right there at the racetrack, and he had a big old oak tree right there in his backyard, and we give him 50 cents to climb the tree and sit up there and watch the race.
They fill a real void during that time period because there just weren't a lot of entertainment options for people, especially for blue-collar people. And so for $1, $1.50, you go to race, have a great time. They're sliding through the turn and banging into each other. Then after the race, getting out and fighting, it was just incredible entertainment for people, and they loved it.
They was having races on Saturday afternoons. I think I ended up getting $13. It was fun. We had fun. It wasn't nothing but jalopies, I guess you'd call it to start with, but that's the way we got started.
For every guy you've ever heard of, for every guy whose name has even sort of appeared on the radar screen in NASCAR, there are 50 guys who were heroes at tracks like Concord and Greenville-Pickens. That sort of was the seed work for what's grown today. You took the best of the best and you put them on the big tracks, and that became Winston Cup racing.
By 1950, the gritty stops on the NASCAR circuit included dirt bull ranges like Charlotte Speedway on Thursday night, Asheville, Weaverville on Friday, Macon on Saturday, and Lakewood on Sundays. So just about everyone was shocked when businessman Hal Brasington announced he was constructing the South's very first superspeedway, a 1.25-mile paved asphalt track from an isolated patch of farmland near Darlington, South Carolina. Brasington hoped the track's status would one day rival that of the prestigious Indianapolis Speedway. The unusual pear-shaped design was the result after Brasington was forced to build the track around Ramsey's Pond, named after an avid bass fisherman and minnow farmer who owned the land.
There was no place to stay, hardly any place to eat. I remember I slept on the courthouse lawn for 2 or 3 nights.
The marquee event, the Southern 500, would run on Labor Day 1950. France feared the late model stocks would not last 500 miles, but NASCAR sanctioned the race anyway. The race offered the richest purse ever for a stock car event, with over $10,000 going to the winner. War hero Bud Moore fielded his first Grand National entry, qualifying a Mercury with Joe Eubanks behind the wheel. Crowd favorite Curtis Turner captured the pole, averaging 82 miles per hour. No one had any idea how the stock cars or tires would respond on the asphalt.
We just had old street tires on, and they squealed. And of course, we didn't have any earplugs or anything. That's why everybody in that era is a little hard of hearing today.
They just got tires wherever they could find them, from Montgomery Ward and mail order houses. And the first Southern 500 was like an artillery range. Tires were blowing out all over the place.
When the racing tires ran out, crew chiefs began grabbing tires off passenger cars parked in the infield. After 6 punishing hours, Johnny Mance, who had experience on asphalt driving in the Indy 500, won the race by 9 laps in his pint-sized Plymouth. Mance's secret? He was the only driver to use sturdy truck tires.
That little Plymouth just kept going, you know. He didn't stop changing tires. He qualified the slowest out of everybody there. So, you know, it wasn't because of speed, it was endurance.
The treacherous turns of the track's odd design inspired drivers to nickname the tough layout the Lady in Black. The Southern 500 instantly became the most sought-after NASCAR title of the year.
To me, that's the ultimate, because it's been there for a million years, and just my personal opinion is Darlington is the ultimate.
The pomp and ceremonies surrounding the race at Darlington each year gave NASCAR's most dazzling personalities, like the zany Fonty Flock, a chance to promote himself and his new sport. Flock, who won the 1952 race at Darlington, was one of the first drivers to enjoy a loyal devotion among the fans.
He stopped on the front straightaway in his Bermuda shorts and out there and led the trackside crowd into singing of Dixie. Some of these early films you've seen him, he's marvelous behind the microphone. And so when you need to interview somebody, Fonty was readily available, never turned anybody down, and helped elevate the sport. He was just what Bill France needed.
Like his older brother, Tim Flock also learned to play to the grandstand. He is the only Grand National driver on record to drive with a co-pilot, Jocko, a hell-raising pet monkey.
And old Jocko went everywhere Tim did. They had him a little suit and everything, a helmet hung on his head. He was cute as he could be.
Tim Flock of Decatur, Georgia, driving car number 91, opens up along the backstretch to take over the lead.
Jocko, a huge celebrity among the fans, rode alongside Tim in 8 races during the 1953 season.
There wasn't a problem until back then they had a flap over the right front tire, and there was a chain attached to it, and they would pull that chain to check the tire wear. And he reached over and he pulled that chain, and a rock flew up and nipped him on the shoulder, and it startled the monkey so bad that he got loose from his little perch and was running all around the inside of the race car and got it basically around my father's neck. And my dad was leading the race at the time, and he had to stop to get a monkey off his back, and it cost him the win. He finished 3rd place. So my dad said that was the end of Jocko's career.
Tim just did things because it was fun. Tim did them because he felt like doing them. It was kind of a Mardi Gras mentality. Curtis Turner and Joe Weatherly and Tim Flock, it was let the good times roll.
To publicize NASCAR in front of auto executives, France took his traveling circus to Detroit in the summer of 1951. Big Bill made sure that every make-up car available to the public was represented in the race, 14 different models in all. The race was a spectacular success. Tommy Thompson and wildman Curtis Turner played to the crowd, swapping the lead back and forth, colliding with each other time after time. Thompson took the checkered flag after Turner fell out with a broken radiator. Automobile executives in attendance were thrilled and motivated to join the new phenomenon, NASCAR.
In the 1950s, the automotive industry, the real movers and shakers in that industry were risk takers as well. The idea of racing cars straight off the showroom floor was a relatively new concept. For the automakers to go out and see not only the response of the fans, the people who went out and watched the race, but the idea of their cars competing against each other at this rate of speed and at this sort of out there on the edge, that was a key moment because it opened the eyes and the minds of the automobile industry in this country as to what role racing could play in both advertising and helping them develop their cars and their product.
The Nash Motor Company became the first automobile manufacturer to formally back drivers in NASCAR. Nash supplied its top model, called the Ambassador, to Bill France and Curtis Turner for the first Mexican road race in 1950, a wild race over 2,000 miles of jagged countryside. Turner and Southern 500 winner Johnny Mance were supplied with the Ambassador in the 1951 season. Turner won a big race at Charlotte with the large, lumbering sedan, but the superstar abandoned the car midway through the season, exclaiming that it was an upside-down bathtub that overheats all the time. Racing pioneer Marshall Teague was convinced the unique design of the Hudson Hornet could succeed the Nash Ambassador as a winner in NASCAR.
Marshall Teague did the best thing for the sport in the very beginning of anybody. He went to Detroit and convinced Hudson that they had to be in NASCAR. Now here was a boy not that well educated, but he had the smarts when it come to an automobile.
The Hornet's big six-cylinder engine with its innovative twin-H power carburetor setup and heavy-duty suspension led to domination of NASCAR races from 1951 to 1953. The engines of the Hornets rarely overheated, a key to surviving most early stock car races. The Hornet's superior mechanical traits, in unison with its unique engineering, made it the first great racing stock car.
When you open the door on the Hudson, the floorboard, you had to, it dropped down. You stepped down inside of it, and the whole silhouette of the car was lower to the ground. And that's what made it such a good race car, because all the weight was closer to the ground.
With superstar drivers Marshall Teague, Herb Thomas, and Tim Flock, the Hudson team won 3 straight championships from 1951 to 53. In that incredible run, the fabulous Hornets captured 61 out of 112 races. Hudson's sales to the public soared, and the term win on Sunday, sell on Monday was coined. But the manufacturer's run in NASCAR was short-lived. Hudson failed to keep pace with the mechanical engineering of Chevrolet and Ford, who were now producing the powerful V8 overhead valve engines. Herb Thomas jumped ship from Hudson for General Motors, which had under its hood the ultimate weapon, the young, outspoken mechanic, Smokey Yunick.
Herb Thomas, Smokey Yunick was his mechanic. Now, do I need to say any more? Smokey could make a car go quick.
Smokey Yunick was one of the most brilliant minds to ever work in racing, and one of the most outrageous characters. He was a bomber pilot in World War II, a decorated veteran, and a professional full-time hellraiser.
He was the most controversial person that I've ever seen. And get him and Bill France together, and then you got the 2 most controversial people I've ever seen.
He was also a person who was not political. It was either right or it was wrong. Smokey and Bill were always fighting, primarily because Bill France was NASCAR, and he made the rules as to what was legal and what wasn't legal. And Smokey was the sort of guy who would do anything that it took to win a race. Any advantage was great.
The enthusiastic pilot survived combat in both the European and Pacific theaters during World War II. From his war experiences, Yunick gathered cutting-edge technical information and applied that aircraft data to his racing cars. He was without equal when it came to dodging NASCAR rules in order to increase engine power. He was also light years ahead of his competition when it came to the new concept of racing car aerodynamics. He was the first in NASCAR to understand the relationship between the shape of the car's body and the effects of wind resistance at high speeds. Smokey's best damn garage in town, in Daytona Beach, Florida, was a shrine to engineering innovation and shrouded in secrecy.
Smokey had all the windows in his shop painted over so you couldn't come and peer in. It was amazing. Everything was lined up on the bench and in proper order. Everything was neat.
During his heyday, nobody could get in there. You had to be very close to him in order to get into his garage, because he was always conducting secret experiments for the car companies, the submarines, helicopters. He was involved with a lot of people, and he was very powerful.
Like Smokey Yunick, industrialist Carl Kiekhaefer, founder of the Mercury Outboard Motor Company, helped propel NASCAR into the progressive jet age of the 1950s.
Carl Kiekhaefer brought a level of professionalism to the sport in the mid-1950s that no one had ever even remotely approached.
There was no money in stock car racing until Carl Kiekhaefer came along with his Chryslers, and that was a very well-funded team, and it won more than its share of races because of that.
He went out and he hired Junior Johnson, Buck Baker, Speedy Thompson, Fonty Flock, Frank Mundy. It was the Kiekhaefer team running against the rest of NASCAR.
He was a drill sergeant. He fired people that didn't even work for him.
Never took a penny out of racing. All he wanted was the trophies. And he was a real sportsman, and he hated to lose.
Kiekhaefer competed with the most powerful production car available, the Chrysler 300, which had under its hood the potent Hemi head engine. The Hemi had been developed from wartime aircraft technology. The first-class Chryslers provided the industrialist with the perfect platform for advertising his Mercury outboard business, so he spared no expense.
He was the first to have covered transporters. He was the first to do testing in an organized, systematic way. He had guys who traveled the dirt tracks with him who would take samples of the dirt and analyze them for composition.
At Langhorne, he had his gas cans all covered up, and then he'd have one of the mechanics. He had him pouring the gas from one can into another. So I made a shot of it, and Carl came over and said, "If you want pictures of that stuff, just contact my office and I'll get you whatever you need." He didn't want everybody else to find out about it. What they were doing was what you'd call oxygenating the fuel. You were trying to get air into the fuel so it would burn better.
Kiekhaefer's gleaming white race cars virtually monopolized the NASCAR series in the 1955-56 seasons. In 1955, Tim Flock won 19 pole positions and 18 out of 39 races, easily winning the championship. The multi-car team won 22 out of 39 races in 1955, and in 11 of those races, the Chryslers led every single lap.
NASCAR fans don't like it when one guy wins all the time. And when Kiekhaefer was winning, it was only 10 years after the end of World War II. Kiekhaefer was a guy who looked like a character straight out of central casting for a Gestapo agent. He was kind of ruddy-faced and pudgy, and he had the kind of round glasses that you often saw German spies and German Gestapo agents portrayed with in movies at the time. He was an enormously unpopular character in the South.
In the 1956 season, Kiekhaefer drivers won 16 races in a row, a mark that will never likely be eclipsed. That year, Herb Thomas replaced Tim Flock, who quit the team, citing the unbearable stress of working with the car owner. Midway through the season, Thomas also quit the team. By mid-September, Thomas, now driving a self-built Chevrolet, was leading the NASCAR series in points, with Kiekhaefer's driver Buck Baker a close second. To boost Baker's chances of winning the championship, Kiekhaefer made an unusually bold but legal overture to France.
What Kiekhaefer did in his own inimitable way was add a couple races to the end of the season. And France let him do it. And in one of those races at the end, Herb Thomas had a terrible accident and almost died. And Buck Baker ended up winning the driving championship, which pleased Kiekhaefer.
That fueled the fire that everybody, the fans and the public and even the media, had against Carl Kiekhaefer. And from Carl Kiekhaefer's point of view, he had done a marvelous job. He did things right, and he thought he should be congratulated for doing so good instead of being booed. He didn't understand that.
Many in the racing community suspected that Speedy Thompson had intentionally wrecked Herb Thomas to help his teammate Buck Baker, but the allegation was never proven. But in the court of public opinion, Kiekhaefer's days in NASCAR were numbered. He departed NASCAR believing ultimately that the negative publicity would harm his Mercury outboard empire, but the car owner left a distinguished impact in racing beyond the sheer number of trophies. Less well known and publicized was the progressive owner's commitment to diversity and equal opportunity. Kiekhaefer hired African-American driver Charlie Scott to drive in the 1956 beach competition. Lady driver Vicki Wood competed against the men at Daytona in 1956, recording the fastest one-way run in measured mile history by clocking over 139 miles per hour on the beach in a Kiekhaefer race car.
It was something fascinating to run on the sand. I've never gave it a thought. Anybody driving on a beach like that, and here you can go 100 and some miles an hour and think nothing of it. It was the biggest thrill I had ever in my life.
9 different drivers won 52 of 90 starts for Kiekhaefer during his short 2-year NASCAR incursion. The car owner spent well over $1 million, much more than his closest rivals, the big boys in Detroit. Kiekhaefer's remarkable success ignited a fierce war between the big 3 automakers for command of NASCAR. Embarrassed by the Chrysler success, Ford and General Motors rushed full throttle into the NASCAR 1956 season. The advertising, clout, and financial backing of the car makers gave NASCAR credibility and the national audience it sought. Containing the influence of the automakers in this series would become one of Bill France's biggest headaches. But for now, his enduring vision of NASCAR was approaching reality. AAA's supremacy in auto racing had a serious challenger. In the mid-1950s, auto racing in the United States suffered a series of tragic events that became public relations disasters, taking the sport to the brink of destruction. The death of open-wheel star Bill Vukovich at Indianapolis in 1955 saddened the racing community. Shortly after Vukovich's death, a horrifying crash at Le Mans in France killed 82 spectators. The United States Congress began to take notice of the increasing number of speeding tickets and accidents, many of which occurred on the newly created modern Eisenhower interstate highway system. Warranted or not, legislators cited the popularity and the influence of automobile racing as the leading cause. Washington threatened to ban all auto racing if safety did not improve. The final setback came in 1957 after a car went into the crowd at a NASCAR race in Martinsville, Virginia, critically wounding a child and injuring 4 fans. Feeling pressure, the American Manufacturers Association in 1957 pulled its support of racing. Next, the big 3 automakers publicly withdrew from NASCAR, though quietly they continued to supply teams through their dealerships. Finally, the venerable American Automobile Association, AAA, the leading sanctioning body in auto racing since the turn of the century, voted to leave racing altogether. While other racing bodies scrambled to deal with the 1957 fallout, Bill France saw the chain reaction of events as an opportunity to realize his ultimate dream for NASCAR.
all the hurdles that had been built in front of Bill France disappeared overnight. And there was the opening he needed to go out of the Southeast and promote NASCAR elsewhere in these United States.
Bill France needed a fresh new star to put a positive spin on NASCAR after 1957, and Glenn "Fireball" Roberts was the ideal candidate. The intelligent Roberts earned his nickname pitching for the minor league baseball team, the Zellwood Mudhens. Fireball was the perfect image NASCAR wanted to portray as the series began to move into the age of television. In the coming 1958 season, Fireball would win 6 out of 10 events, including the Southern 500. 2 of the wins were earned on superspeedway tracks, making the brilliant young star the first racer to win 3 straight superspeedway events in a single year.
He was the first of what we call a thinking driver. Before a race, he would handicap the other drivers so that he would know who would be safe to pass on the outside and who he didn't trust. He was a very, very smart guy. He was an engineer, and he was a handsome guy. He had a tremendous amount of charisma, and he had that fabulous name.
He was my god. He was one reason I ever wanted to go racing. Fireball was like my mentor.
Fireball was a complex individual. He was a plucky perfectionist. Didn't have a lot of time for other people when they interfered with what he was doing. He was never a favorite of the fans, and he was a hard ass, but he was a hell of a driver.
If Fireball was the future of the sport, it was the stern Lee Petty who was now on a winning streak. With unwavering consistency, Petty had pounded out the Grand National Championship in 1954.
He worked on his own car. He owned his own car. There was no sponsor, so he was trying to make a living out of it. So he said, okay, you know, if we win the race, it's great, but if we fall out, we don't have a lot to eat this coming week. So it's better to run second, third, fourth, or fifth, finish the race, not tear up your equipment, and then you get a paycheck at the end of the day.
Lee once said, you know, if we'd have been ditch diggers, we'd have been good ditch diggers. We're racers. We're good racers.
The 1954 championship was gratifying payback for Petty, who had lost the title in 1950, when France docked him for competing in outlaw events not sanctioned by NASCAR. Lee's oldest son, Richard, just 17, went to his father in 1954 and asked him if he could drive in a race, but the patriarch said no, declaring he could not afford for the youngster to wreck their livelihood.
Fortunately for Richard Petty, in 1958, his daddy Lee won the racing championship. So they had money that allowed Richard to run. If Lee had not been successful in '58, it's very possible that Richard would have been a mechanic.
The last race on the Daytona Beach road course was held in February 1958. The prestige of the unforgettable races established a solid foundation for Bill France, but the NASCAR founder wanted to take his sport to even greater heights. France began construction of a stunning new 2.5-mile, $3 million track in Daytona.
It was a tough project. There were swamps and a lot of rattlesnakes.
In 1954, flying with Bill, he would take the prints of that track and spread them out over the airplane. This is how long he was planning ahead. So I had an idea what was to come.
You know, there's a story, it's never been confirmed. This AAA control of racing was very intense, and it was vicious and mean. And Bill France went to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to visit his friends in the garage area. And the word got to the AAA chief steward, a former driver, and he ordered Bill France evicted from the garage area. And guards actually escorted Bill France to the gate and threw him out of the garage area at the Indianapolis Speedway. And the story goes that Bill said, well, I'll build a track to rival the Indianapolis Speedway. Now, whether he did or not, no one knows. But that was the popular story at the time. And then, of course, plans for the Daytona Speedway were made, which led us to think maybe he really meant that.
France designed the track with both the drivers and the fans in mind. The incredible 31-degree banking and long straightaways made it easier for spectators to follow the cars. The challenging, immense layout provided drivers with an experience they could not find on any other track in the world.
Daytona, which was slab, allowed you to go anywhere you wanted in the turns and with freedom. And it was a significant step because all the bank tracks in the past had been parabolic in design.
Drivers were given just 2 weeks to adjust to the amazing new track. In the very first practice run, Fireball Roberts clocked a new unofficial speed record of over 145 miles per hour. The Daytona International Speedway was finally ready for its grand introduction onto the Nascar stage. 47,000 anxious fans were in attendance, with Lee Petty and his number 42 Oldsmobile racing against the powerful Holman and Moody Thunderbirds. Now a sophomore sensation, young Richard Petty competed in an Oldsmobile convertible. The track's inaugural 500-mile race was historic. Two drivers on the lead lap, Johnny Beauchamp and Lee Petty, battled it out at over 135 miles per hour towards the most dramatic finish in stock car racing history.
Bill France called Johnny Beauchamp the winner. It was rather clear that Lee Petty won.
Joe Weatherly, who was 2 laps down but didn't know it, added to the chaos when he dashed to the checkered flag on the outside of the track alongside Petty and Beauchamp.
60-some hours later, the evidence was there in both film footage and the photo, which Lee Petty was about 1.5 feet, 2 feet ahead, clearly. Bill France did the right thing in the end. He drug it along, but Betty Kahn, the writer at the Daytona Beach News Journal at the time, says he milked every moment out of that race. Kept on getting more and more suspenseful each day. Who won the 500-mile sweepstakes race? And finally declared Lee Petty as the winner. They overturned it.
It was on the front page of sports pages for 3 days. And if it had just run the race and Daddy would have won the race and it would have been in Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday, you wouldn't heard about it. So it got to be a lot of controversy, and as the controversy really brought Daytona to the forefront right quick with just one race.
For the race to come down to photo finish after 500 miles of non-stop racing, no caution flags, if Hollywood would have drummed that up, you'd have laughed it off.
There were 33 lead changes in the first Daytona 500. Petty ran a whopping 33 miles per hour faster than any previous Grand National race. The average for the leaders was over 135 miles per hour, just slightly under the average that year for the celebrated Indy 500. The 1959 debut of the Daytona track inspired many other original, if not downright, odd moments. Tommy Irwin's Thunderbird sailed into the infield lake during the qualifying round, and he stayed submerged for several terrifying minutes. Tiger Tom Pistone, a young driver from Chicago who couldn't swim, was spooked by Irwin's bad luck. For the big race, Pistone took a precautionary safety measure.
So I went out and bought an aqua lung, a life jacket, and one of those oxygen tanks. And I stuck it in the car and drove the whole race with it. They can laugh all they want. I couldn't swim.
Pistone, who actually wore the contraption during the race, still gets ribbed about the incident today. Lady Leadfoot, Vicky Wood, brought her speed act from the beach and established the woman's closed-course world record on the track. She flew around the high-banked asphalt oval at over 130 miles per hour in her own 1959 Pontiac.
The tires weren't safe enough to go over 100 miles an hour. Ralph Moody says, bring your car over to my pit area, and he says, I'll put my tires on your car and you can set the record. And so he did, and I did.
Vicki Wood, top-notch woman driver, says it's just pull out, pass, and pull in. Back into the safe lane in the shortest distance of all, 177 yards. A woman driver shows them all how it's done.
After his big win at Daytona, Lee Petty went on to capture the points championship in 1959, the same year son Richard won his first race at Lakewood. The young driver's first win was tarnished, however, by a protest filed by the second-place finisher.
And at the end of the race, Lee protested. He complained that they had added up the laps wrong and that Richard hadn't won, Lee had won. And they went back and checked, and they gave the victory to Lee. But there are not a lot of people who would protest victory of their own son. Lee was the guy.
Despite losing out to his father at Lakewood, Richard was awarded Rookie of the Year honors in 1959. 1 year later, the 22-year-old finally got his first official win at a 100-miler in Charlotte in February 1960. Lee Petty's youngest son, Morris, tested his skills as a driver, but found his greatest contribution was tuning engines for the family team. Petty Enterprises, the most successful NASCAR team in history, suffered its own share of growing pains.
We've been through a lot of stupid stuff and accidents that was beyond people's control. I mean, we ran over Red Mile or Martinsville. What happened, they jacked the car up and he'd crawled under the car. And for some reason, I decided to go. Anyhow, I ran off and it just burned all the stuff across his shirt, got his skin, stuff had black marks right across his chest. A couple of weeks, he healed back up and come back to work.